Ypres, Belgium, April 22, 1915. German chemist Fritz Haber stands near the German front lines, facing the Allied trenches during the Second Battle of Ypres, not holding a rifle, but personally directing a row of thousands of pressurized steel cylinders, while his eyes track the shifting wind. At exactly 5 p.m., he gives the order, and over 160 tons of chlorine gas rolls across the mud as a yellow-green cloud, drifting silently toward the Allied trenches. Within minutes, thousands of soldiers lay incapacitated and suffocating, while Haber watched from a distance, entirely convinced that chemical warfare was the most efficient path to ending the war. Now pull your eyes away from that battlefield and look down at your own arms for a moment, because here is something the history books tend to skip over. Roughly 50% of the nitrogen atoms holding your muscle fibers, your DNA, and your internal organs together right now were manufactured inside that exact same German chemical infrastructure. Your body, at a molecular level, descends directly from a wartime weapons program that would later earn Haber the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1918. There is a clean, comforting story most of us carry about the modern world, where the technology in our kitchens and the medicine keeping our families alive was carefully mapped out by sharp-eyed visionaries moving in a straight line. Grade school textbooks and corporate PR machines have spent over a century reinforcing that version of events, packaging history into a series of tidy moments where everything goes according to plan. The actual record of accidental inventions and unintended consequences looks nothing like that. When you go looking at what really happened, you find a chaotic chain reaction of accidents, blunders, and corporate cover-ups that nobody planned and nobody would admit to. In this video, using AI-generated historical imagery and real archival footage, we are pulling these stories apart to show what the textbook version left out. Before we get into the first invention, drop a comment below and tell me which accidental invention from this list surprises you the most. Today, we are tracing the actual lineage of 5 everyday things, because as it turns out, none of their creators were trying to change civilization. One was trying to win a trench war. One was trying to fix a broken radio circuit. One was trying to clear out a post-war factory surplus. Each of them pulled on one small thread, and what came loose was far larger than anything they had intended. At the turn of the 20th century, farmlands across the Western world were running out of natural nitrogen fertilizer, and the math was bad. For thousands of years, agriculture depended on manure, crop rotation, and stockpiles of seabird guano from a handful of Pacific islands. Leading scientists at the time openly predicted that, without a synthetic alternative, global starvation would kill hundreds of millions by the 1930s, and the numbers were hard to argue with. Everything came down to one question. Could anyone pull usable nitrogen directly from the atmosphere? Fritz Haber answered that question in 1909, working inside a small tabletop apparatus under extreme pressure and heat, forcing unreactive atmospheric nitrogen to bond with hydrogen until a steady drip of liquid ammonia came out of the other end. Scaling that tabletop demonstration into something industrial fell to Carl Bosch, an engineer at the chemical company BASF, working alongside his assistant, Alwin Mittasch. Bosch designed the high-pressure steel reactor, while Mittasch ran roughly 20,000 catalyst experiments to find a cheap, workable replacement for the rare metals Haber had used in the lab. The work took 4 years, and Bosch would later win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1931. Synthetic fertilizer pulled directly from the air was now a practical reality. That process is the primary reason the global population grew from 1.6 billion people to over 8 billion, with more than half of the current global food supply depending on it today. What nobody planned for was what would happen to the same infrastructure once the war broke out. In late 1914, with the British naval blockade cutting Germany off from Chilean saltpeter, Carl Bosch met with the German War Ministry and promised that BASF could convert its fertilizer reactors to manufacture concentrated nitrate gunpowder for the German military. Without that shift, Germany would have run out of munitions within months, and historians estimate the conversion extended World War I by 2 to 3 years. Haber spent the same years working on chemical weapons. He went further, personally supervising the placement of toxic cylinders on battlefields, and stating on record that death was death regardless of how it arrived. His institute spent the 1920s developing a cyanide-based pest fumigant called Zyklon A, and a few years after Haber died in exile, the Nazi regime stripped the warning agent from that compound, redesignated it Zyklon B, and used it in gas chambers to kill over 1 million people, among them members of Haber's own extended family. The man who arguably fed more people than anyone in history also set in motion one of the worst atrocities in modern memory. The Haber story is about a useful invention turned into a weapon. The penicillin story is about the opposite problem, a genuine scientific breakthrough that got buried, dug back up by a completely different team, and then handed back to the wrong person in front of the entire world. The grade school version of this story goes like this. In September 1928, Alexander Fleming came back from vacation to find a forgotten petri dish sitting on his bench, where a mold spore had blown through an open window, landed on his bacterial culture, and killed the surrounding staph infection. Fleming had a moment of realization, invented antibiotics, and saved the human race. It is a clean, camera-ready narrative, and almost none of it holds up. Here is what actually happened. Fleming rarely opened his windows, confirmed by historical reconstructions, so the mold spore drifted up through open stairwell doors from a mycology laboratory 1 floor below him, not through any open window. His recorded reaction upon examining the dish was a deadpan observation. That's funny. And while that observation mattered, Fleming never cured a single patient with penicillin because he could not isolate or stabilize the compound. By 1932, convinced the substance was too unstable to work inside a living body, he abandoned the research entirely, leaving penicillin as a footnote in a 1929 journal paper that almost nobody read. In 1939, a separate team at Oxford University rediscovered Fleming's abandoned paper. Howard Florey, Ernst Chain, Norman Heatley, and Edward Abraham engineered a back extraction technique from scratch, ran clinical trials, and confirmed that the compound worked. The problem was scale. With World War II closing in on Britain, large-scale production was impossible, which pushed the team to partner with a government agricultural lab in Peoria, Illinois. And that move is where the London legend starts to come apart. Fleming's original strain was too weak to mass produce at any useful scale, and the antibiotic in your pharmacy right now traces back not to his London petri dish, but to a rotting cantaloupe pulled from a Peoria fruit market in 1943 by a lab assistant named Mary Hunt, nicknamed Moldy Mary. The mold on that discarded melon turned out to be a strain called Penicillium rubens NRRL 1951, over 200 times more productive than what Fleming had found. After researchers blasted it with X-rays to force mutations and amplified its yield 1,000-fold, this Peoria mold was mass-produced in time for D-Day, where it kept millions of soldiers alive. Fleming received essentially all the public credit because St. Mary's Hospital, backed by British press barons, ran an aggressive PR campaign promoting the lone hero narrative to boost national prestige during the war, while the Oxford team, who actually engineered mass production, received almost none of it. Fleming, Florey, and Chain shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1945, but by then the myth was already cemented. Norman Heatley, despite being arguably the most crucial member of the Oxford team, was famously snubbed. He's still known as the forgotten man of penicillin. Before the late 1950s, artificial cardiac pacing meant being connected to a machine the size of a television set, which had to be rolled on a cart, plugged into a wall outlet, and kept running at all times because any power interruption could be fatal. These machines kept the heart beating by delivering high-voltage shocks directly through the skin, and the patient could not leave the hospital room. What changed all of that came from an engineer who grabbed the wrong component and did not notice until it was too late. In 1956, Wilson Greatbatch was building an electronic oscillator at University of Buffalo, not to treat heart conditions, but to record the audio sounds of a diseased heart for study. While assembling his prototype, he reached into a component box for a standard 10 kilo-ohm resistor, pulled out a 1 megaohm resistor by mistake, a component with 100 times the resistance, and soldered it in without checking the label. Then he switched the device on. The device did not record anything. Instead, it produced a series of sharp, rhythmic electrical pulses, a signal lasting a fraction of a second, a pause of exactly 1 second, and then the same thing again. Greatbatch stared at the circuit and recognized that this accidental timing cycle matched the electrical conduction system of a resting human heart, which meant that if he could shrink the device down, coat it in something protective, and implant it in the chest, the massive wall-mounted machines became unnecessary. Over the next 2 years, Greatbatch encapsulated the 2-transistor circuit in protective epoxy resin, powered it with zinc mercuric oxide batteries, and kept refining the design. On May 7, 1958, at the Buffalo Veterans Administration Hospital, a surgeon implanted the 2-cubic-inch device into a dog, and the heart started pacing immediately, in sync with the accidental oscillator. The first human patient received the Chardak Greatbatch pacemaker in 1960, and because medical manufacturers were too skeptical of implantable electronics to help early on, Greatbatch built his prototypes out of a barn. It all started with a wrong color band on a resistor. When the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, the military canceled all of Kimberly-Clark's contracts overnight, leaving the company with over 1.5 million pounds of unsold surgical padding and no customers. The material in question was something the company called Cellucotton, a crept wood pulp wadding derived from spruce pulp that absorbed 5 times the fluid of standard cotton at half the production cost. Before the war ended, the military had been buying it by the millions of pounds for frontline bandages, and now all of that stopped. Looking for a way out, the company brought in an executive named Walter Lukey to find a civilian use for the surplus material. Lukey had picked up a rumor through the American Fund for the French Wounded. Frontline Red Cross nurses had quietly been using the surgical bandages to manage their own menstrual cycles. When Lukey brought the idea to the boardroom, he hit a wall of Victorian squeamishness, with executives arguing the product was too personal to advertise and manufacturing partners refusing to touch it entirely. Kimberly-Clark ended up setting up a separate wooden shed in Neenah, Wisconsin, where female laborers made the first pads by hand, and the name chosen, Kotex, a portmanteau of cotton texture, was specifically designed to obscure what the product actually was. The advertising agency Lord & Thomas solved the retail problem by placing Kotex boxes directly on store counters next to a small metal coin tin. A woman could walk in, slide a 50-cent coin into the slot, take a box, and leave without speaking to anyone, specifically because asking a male drugstore clerk for the product was considered mortifying. Kimberly-Clark built a billion-dollar business by first identifying a social embarrassment and then engineering a transaction that avoided it entirely. A few years after that, they flattened the same Cellucotton pulp into a thinner sheet, called it Kleenex, and marketed it to women for removing cosmetic cold cream, which is how a wartime surgical bandage became 2 staples of the modern bathroom. In the 1920s, early household refrigerators ran on gases like ammonia, sulfur dioxide, and methyl chloride, all of them toxic and volatile. A cracked rubber seal or a ruptured valve while a family slept could silently fill the home, and entire families died from their own appliances with enough regularity that newspapers began calling for a complete ban on mechanical refrigeration. Keeping food cold was a genuine hazard. Frigidaire, a General Motors subsidiary, brought in a mechanical engineer named Thomas Midgley Jr. to find something that would not kill anyone. In 1928, Midgley synthesized dichlorodifluoromethane, a chemical compound that became commercially known as Freon, the world's first chlorofluorocarbon. To demonstrate that it was harmless, he stood at a press conference, inhaled the gas, and blew it over a candle flame to extinguish it, and the room accepted this as proof. Refrigeration became safe, affordable, and available to most households within a few years. Safe refrigeration changed more than food storage. A reliable cold chain meant cities could be built in desert climates, where heat would have made large populations impossible to feed. And because food could now be stored at home for weeks at a time, people no longer needed to live within walking distance of a fresh market, which reshaped the geography of modern suburbs entirely. What Midgley had not accounted for was the long-term behavior of CFCs in the upper atmosphere, because his miracle gas, the compound that ended decades of kitchen poisonings, turned out to be eating through the Earth's ozone layer at a rate that scientists are still measuring today. It took until the Montreal Protocol of 1987 for the world to begin phasing out CFCs, but by then, the damage was already done. Every time you eat a meal, recover from an infection, or reach into a refrigerator, you are drawing on something that started as someone else's failure or miscalculation. Roughly half the nitrogen atoms in your body right now were processed by industrial reactors originally built for a wartime weapons program. None of the people in this video set out to change how civilization works. Each of them was trying to solve something much smaller, and the world they accidentally built in the process is the one you are living in. The next time you pull a tissue from a box, take a prescription antibiotic, or reach for something cold from your fridge, what you're holding started as a failed experiment, a mistaken component, or a warehouse full of unsold bandages. None of it was planned. If you want more of this, share the video with someone who likes real history, hit subscribe to join the archives, and drop a comment telling me which modern piece of technology you think is going to accidentally reshape the world 100 years from now. Until next time, history is watching.